so bear with me. And I'm also going to try to figure out the clicker. Yeah, it works. Okay, well, thank you so much. Hope you're having a good morning. My name is Natalia Bailey, and I'm a research manager at Feedback Lab in machine learning. What are we talking about? And I'm going to start out by asking you with a machine learning system in some way. Now, that machine learning system is a bit different. It uses algorithms for figuring out what kind of TV shows you like, what kind of movies you like. That's a bit different than using it when you're trying to decide whether a person is granted a loan or not. I have on the screen a bit of formal definitions of what machine learning is. But I also want to make it a little bit techniques to understand the relationships with the data. And cross-validation is really a way of partitioning data in which the model sees these data only at various different stages. So for training, for testing, for validation, typically they have 3 or 4 partitions of data, most of the firms that I've looked at their use. And the fourth one is that it can ingest vast amount of data. It actually, many experts would say, works best with vast amounts of data, including unstructured data, although there are also some AI experts in the community that will tell you that it also can work with smaller data sets. Okay, so now that I explained what machine learning is, I'm gonna just quickly mention where the data points that I'm referencing come from. Whenever I mention the US market, I'm talking about Feedback Lab's study. You may have heard Melissa yesterday. She talked about the work that Feedback Lab has been doing to understand the use of cash flow data for credit underwriting of consumers or MSMEs. She also mentioned briefly that we have also looked at the use of machine learning for that same purpose. In the US, we did a market context report that was published in 2017 where we looked at 30 financial institutions, both banks and non-banks. I'm also going to be referencing the surveys that I did starting in 2017 that were published throughout various years on the use of machine learning in credit risk with a sample of a geographically diverse sample of 60 firms around the globe, including 3 firms in South Africa, 1 firm in Egypt, firms in Asia Pacific, Australia, Japan, China, in the Middle East, Europe, Latin America, Canada, and the US. So this is really a bit of my perspective and the journey that I have gone through. I think it's relevant because this topic is a bit tangential to the conference, but it really is where the future will take the majority of the financial institutions here. So when I first started looking at the use of machine learning in 2017, it was through it was an expansion of the work I was doing looking at capital adequacy in banks and looking at credit risk models. And those firms were really interested in this new buzzword of machine learning. Some of them had already been using, some of these 60 firms that I'm going to be talking about their trajectory had already been using machine learning. But the surprising thing is that machine learning back then wasn't clustered in US big firms or Canadian big firms or even big European firms. There were some Latin American firms, some UAE firms, some South African firms that were already using machine learning. And when we asked why, the answer was that back then, it had to do with the digital transformation agenda of certain firms. Less so about the size of the firm or the geography of where that firm was. Something that was surprising to see throughout the years is that from 2018 to 2019, the number of firms that were using machine learning for credit scoring and decisioning doubled within that sample. And what I did was separate those that were using machine learning in production, those that were using machine learning in pilot projects, which also, by the way, by 2020, it had increased by 125% within that sample, and then those that were beginners, and try to understand what were the different challenges that they were encountering along the way in this journey to embrace new technologies. So something that was, and this also came through on, and I'm going to sort of skip around, on the US study that FinReg Lab has done, is that the main reason why financial institutions, the main gain that they saw was on improving accuracy. Predictive accuracy was the main motivation. I'm gonna go back now. And it's kind of funny to use the microphone. Sorry. Okay. So I mentioned the materiality I have not mentioned the materiality of the use cases, but something that was also important to remark from the get-go is that when you hear machine learning is being used, sometimes people assume that it is an entire model that is using machine learning. But it's often not the case. Typically, machine learning may be used at various different stages within the model development process. So in certain instances, firms are maybe only using machine learning for data cleaning. In other instances, they may be using it for segmentation. In others, they may actually be using it for model development, for feature selection, for finding features that actually are more predictive, for model building, for model validation. There are certain firms that throughout the years have expanded their usage to really cover the whole spectrum of the model development process. The other thing that I think is really interesting to see is the sophistication of the machine learning algorithms. From the first time that I was talking to certain firms across the globe, in terms of what they consider machine learning to how they were using it by the time I talked to them last. So when at the beginning it may have been logistic regressions, later on they had been using XGBoost, which is actually also what we have seen in the US sample of banks at FinReg Lab. So XGBoost is actually the favorite algorithm that is being used by all financial institutions that are using machine learning. But there are also other firms that have graduated. So they may have to be using XGBoost and then they started doing pilots, looking at deep neural nets or neural networks to try to improve predictive performance. In terms of the areas of usage, it has mainly been for credit scoring and decisioning in the global sample. In certain countries, like Latin America, like the Africa sample, the Middle East, it has also been used quite a lot for credit monitoring, for early warning systems. There is the case of one Canadian firm, and this is taking you up to North America, but there was the case of one Canadian firm that has successfully created a machine learning model in which they were using it for credit monitoring, for early warning systems, and their CEO actually mentioned that using it for that purpose had reduced arrears by 10%, which is a big deal. So in terms of the benefits and the challenges, so the benefits, I mentioned it already, increased model accuracy is the main benefit, and that is across all geographies, including the US. The discovery of new risk segments or patterns that were previously unnoticed, that is in Europe, Asia Pacific, China, Middle East, and Africa, primarily. But it points out to the potential of using the technology if used responsibly and within a model governance process that is part of the risk management process that already exists in firms. In Latin America, firms have also highlighted improving efficiency in the model development process as one of the main benefits of using that technology. And everywhere in the world except for the US and Canada, it was overcoming data deficiencies and inconsistencies. Now, when I talk about the challenges, so the challenges really vary, and this is again partially what I had seen, in terms of where you are in that stage on the uses of the technology. So if you're a beginner firm that does not have pilot projects, you're starting to invest on it, you would mention the cost of the technology as one of the things that deter you from using machine learning. Earlier on, most of the conversations were around bringing senior management on board on wanting to invest on this technology when you're thinking about deploying pilots. But there are three main things that, for firms that mention these as a challenge, this was actually one of the challenges that was harder to overcome and that had the most impact to them. And that is IT infrastructure issues, especially for the big firms that have multiple mergers and acquisitions. Data quality was a huge issue. Data quality meaning multiple data sources, meaning poor data quality in terms of erroneous data, lack of label data, the lack of availability of historical data, you name it. There were so many issues related to data quality. And then, I think the previous speaker sort of alluded to these, the person from Finbox, which I forgot your name. The other big thing was talent, both in terms of acquiring talent and retaining talent. So the whole point of talent acquisition was more difficult for beginners, for firms that have pilot projects. For those that had models in production, talent acquisition wasn't so much of an issue. What had become an issue was retaining the talent. And when I would go and talk to supervisors and regulators across the globe from where these firms were based about these findings, several regulators and supervisors would say, well, if you think it's hard for you, bank, to hire this person and retain it, then think about where we stand, because they also need to build their teams. So, both in the US, in Europe, in Singapore, Hong Kong, Netherlands, in the EU, there has been several developments in terms of what regulators and supervisors are doing to understand better and provide guidance around the use of this technology. One important thing to remark is really the importance of model governance, of embedding within the risk management framework of your credit application machine learning and its usage. And I don't think it's a surprise, and some of the questions that came after the presentation, that issues around explainability, bias, and ethical implications are really high top on the list. And in terms of looking ahead, what can we expect? Machine learning is not going to go away. It's going to come to this market, and it's going to continue to be used in all the other markets that it's being used. But I think that then it is important to think about the materiality, that is, what is the risk associated with particular use cases, for high-risk use cases. The types of controls and metrics that are put in place may be different than for the use of machine learning in marketing, or for, whether you want to watch a movie based on the movie that you watched before. So that's it for me. I hope that I stay within the 20 minutes I was given. And I think I'm now going to sit down on the podium and have a conversation this summer. Thank you.
Ensuring that we engage with our stakeholders who are in the policy space, those that are also in the marketplace, ensuring that we deliver benefits for our members. And maybe just to emphasize something that is related to information sharing is the policy environment within which we work. Even as we engage with Natalia on this, is the issue of, I think Habil did mention yesterday in his remarks that from 2019, this chart. So thanks Natalia for a very insightful presentation. But as you made your presentation, I was just imagining, of course, the potential of AI in our financial systems, and I was looking at it through the lens of the pillars that the financial industry is performing. And of course, the issues around ethical considerations really come up when there is mining of data from social media, from behavioral conduct of customers, and of course, ethical considerations. Because I was just imagining this, that I missed some gym sessions, and I go to my insurance and they tell me, hey, your premiums have gone up by this much, because we can see from your records that you've been missing your gym sessions. And of course, that's not very pleasant news. Yeah, and then on the other hand, I go to my car insurance and say, hey, in the year, out of the 365 days, you didn't belt up 200 of the days that you are driving because your car was moving, and we noticed you are not belted up as you are driving, so your premiums also go up. All that information can be mined from the linkages we have with technology that then can inform some of the decisions that are made that have financial implications at the end of the day. So you painted a picture of the benefits that machine learning and artificial intelligence continues to present for banking sector, as well as also financial sector players. And of course, we're coming from a space where we're looking at reliance on structured data to now reliance on more unstructured information that need to be processed. So as we talk about machine learning, definitely we appreciate the issues around it. All crystallizes within a modeling, these tools that have come to help us convert data into information and help us be able to now make decisions that affect the way we deal with our customers, the way we make credit decisions, the way we monitor credit performances, as well as also risk mitigations. And now also including the aspects of strategies that institutions can build using the same. And you painted a picture of experiences in other jurisdictions that have also emerged as global high users of machine learning and artificial technology. But of course, for Kenyan market, in terms of banking sector, you remember the onset of COVID presented new challenges. And as it presented new challenges, looking at now, firms are not able any longer to submit information that is relevant for decision making by the bankers. So they've either missed submissions of financial records, and therefore the continued need for banks to explore opportunities for raising information that is relevant for decision making, monitoring of credit performance has become increasingly high. So we cannot overemphasize the role of artificial intelligence, the role of machine learning tools in really bridging that gap where banks lack full information. And amidst this is also another emerging risk, because we see that the supervisory, you mentioned about supervisory roles that come into play in terms of ensuring that there is adequate information, but some supervisory or even regulatory pronouncements actually work against the information systems that are in place. Like for instance, I'll give you a story, an instance in Kenya. We had in 2022 there was an announcement of suspension of listing in CRBs. But of course everyone said, wow, I mean that's unimaginable. That would affect definitely how credit scoring comes about, because you're suspending the listing of negative information, and what does that mean for any lists? Because ideally the framework is supporting a full listing. So there is also a risk, in as much as the role of regulators is important in reinforcing the use of information for credit analysis. Again, it can also be a risk when the same framework is infiltrated with pronouncements that actually affect its viability for use. And therefore now banks continuously are becoming more aware, and the need for them to explore alternative data becomes very critical. In the course of the discussions, really from your presentation as well as also from the previous session that we just had, was the issue that is coming out is really the customizations. At the end of the day, in as much as AI and machine learning techniques are very robust, there is also an input, and I think Mutisia mentioned about the feature engineering that has to be put in place. And of course, that is a pointer of some level of subjectivity on whoever is doing the machine learning, applying the machine learning techniques. So with these subjectivities, of course, there are risks that come on board. And as this continues to be applied and even being considered more by financial institutions, I would really be very interested to hear from your experience and surveys that you've conducted at FinRec in terms of what are some of the best practices that have been deployed to really minimize the risks that come with customizations, the modifications, the weights that are applied during machine learning development as well as modeling and even in the interpretation stage.
Most of the use of machine learning is static. I think you saw that there. In other countries, they may have more of that learning, but it kind of goes back to what is the level of automation that you are setting up for a particular use case. There are certain models that may need to be reviewed and updated more often than others, but it really is based on the use case and the application. Something that I wanted to check is from the people that are in the room, that are either bankers, fintech, digital lenders, credit bureaus, which of you are actually using machine learning right now? Can you put your hand up?
Understand, they have not understood well on the data protection. So somebody thinks that because now I have sent you data, you can delete that data immediately if I tell you. But those in the banking sector know that we have retention policies and there's a law on that. So one is this misconception. The other one is maybe you have third parties or companies you're working with in partnership. So maybe there is an issue, a back and forth, or maybe for you to use a machine learning model. Natalie has talked about the data quality, like data has to be accurate and then up to date. So there's a back and forth, and you see as time goes, that data is taking that. So if you wanted it, for example, to be 30 days from maybe for some reason, maybe the income proxy, for example, then by the time we're doing a back and forth with the partners, the data has expired, now it's data fresh. So those are some of the challenges. Maybe you can tell us from your end how you're handling such challenges, because from my end and the people have talked about, maybe in the KBA partners in the banks, those are some of the challenges we have seen.
I thank you in advance for the good presentation. And my name is Kifle from Credit Bureau. So my question is, from your experience, how you are trying to avoid the fear of unknown towards artificial intelligence and the machine learning, so that how we can simply proceed to practical activities or to be practiced, either towards the policy or towards the professional issues. Next, who are technical users of the artificial intelligence? You know, sometimes we may give to someone or someone who are the direct users of the artificial intelligence, specifically related to finance and the credit bureaus.
It was really a bit more earlier on in the discussions, but it makes sense. In terms of how they tackle that, I know I keep saying this, but it's really outside of a machine learning issue. It's just the issues that exist when data quality isn't good, or when you're still encountering the amount of data that is coming to you. And I think it was actually even more problematic when it came to anti-money laundering and fraud prevention when I was looking at that type of data. And then can you remind me of your second question? We still have the microphone.
So the second point is, who are the operators of the machine learning and artificial intelligence, technical operators?
Oh, okay, I see what you're getting at. And the first part of your question was about like how to bring regulators on board, right? Yeah. So I mean, I think that different countries have tackled this differently. The UK, and Anna Wallace is here and probably an expert on this way more than me. That they did the UK private-public partnership, and they really try to bring industry together with regulators and have conversations around the challenges and the concerns that regulators have. I know Singapore had done something similar. The Monetary Authority of Singapore did something similar as well. So I think there is real value on having that public-private collaboration on talking about the challenges are encountered for both sides of the room. And then in terms of who is the person that is in charge within the institution, we actually did ask this question in one of the surveys, and it varies. Generally is higher than the model developer within the firm, but you actually have to have the buy-in and the understanding of your chief risk officer. They need to be able to understand the processes that you may be setting in place. So I think it's a little bit of a chain of command in terms of who is responsible, but ultimately, I don't know if this is gonna be a good enough response, but ultimately the CEO is responsible for what goes on in the firm as well. But the role of the chief risk officer, what we had seen was embedding within senior management of the bank people that understood about what the machine learning models were doing. Something else that I had seen was that big banks around the globe, what they did was create high-level principles around the use of machine learning. So they developed their own principles and then they shared them widely within their institution. Some of them created specific use cases because the application can be different for different purposes within that institution. It was difficult because even when I had conversations on how we are deploying these high-level principles, the deployment part of it took a lot longer. I'm being told to wrap up, but from the back. But if you have any questions, I'm here at the conference today, and I'm here tomorrow. Melissa's also here. We have a paper that we have published that not only the market context report on the use of machine learning in credit underwriting for consumers and MSMEs in the US, but also we have empirically analyzed the use of machine learning post-hoc explainable techniques for credit underwriting.
Thank you. Maybe just in brief on the question around the data protection laws, whether conflict between the need to retain the data as well as customer instruction to delete the data. Some inconsistencies, definitely, and even those are things that are live. We are in discussions with the Office of the Data Commissioner to really clarify them in terms of ensuring that there is retention of data, because it's in the interest of the industry that that information is kept for purposes of KYC. And even the idea that it's constraining some of the initiatives that we were actually considering for the market, like developing an electronic KYC system where when a customer walks to one bank and they need to open an account in another bank, they don't need to reproduce an ID, they don't need to reproduce the KYC documentation, so that it's logged in within one system, and that also supports the issue of credit underwriting. In fact, it's a layering of the information that is generated from credit bureaus, because at one stop, banks can understand what's going on within other banks, and also the issues around cybersecurity in terms of monitoring of cybersecurity. So these are the issues that are live with discussions with the Data Protection Commissioner. And of course, we anticipate that they will be ironed out in due course now that it's a new framework. So we'll be keen to get feedback to you as and when this is clarified. So thank you very much. I can see in the interest of time that we need to go, and I think at this point you're free to clap for us.
Thank you very much, our moderator, Dr. Samuel Tuyongo, Director, Research and Policy, Kenya Bank Association.